Hi, sir.
I'll call the January 27th study session of Newport Beach City Council to order. We may have the roll call, please.
The record will reflect that all members of council are present.
Okay, first item on the agenda is clarification of items on the consent calendar. Councilman Muldoon?
None.
Councilman Duffy?
I have none.
Councilman Curry? None. Councilman Piotr?
I'd like to pull number 9.
No, it's not the time to pull, just if you have questions that you
I do
want to ask now. Councilman Petros?
I have none at this time.
Mayor Pro Tem Dixon?
I have none.
Okay, and I have none. So move on to the second item in our study session, which is a presentation from a Newport Harbor High School Principal, Sean Bolton.
That's all right. You should go to the tall one, yeah.
Mayor Selich, council members, and City Manager Dave Kiff, thank you for having us here today, along with our distinguished guests. This is Mike Shaka, Assistant Principal at Newport Harbor, and we just want to briefly introduce ourselves and also say thank you to the City Council of Newport Beach. This is my second year at Newport Harbor High School as principal, and we've enjoyed a tremendous amount of support from the City of Newport Beach. The School Resource Officer Program with Marie Gamble and Vlad Anderson has been tremendous. The help that we've gotten with some of the underprivileged students that we have through ASB, the city supports us there, and also through the joint use agreement with the swimming pool, the recreation department. Laura Detweiler and her team have been phenomenal, navigating through some of the issues that we stumbled upon when we first got there, and also getting some pieces of the beach for our volleyball team for a fundraiser in the summer, and also our surf team, getting the specific date in place for our surf team to have their contest. Beyond that, we are truly a Newport Mesa school. 60% of our students come from Costa Mesa, 40% of our students come from Newport Beach. So we're kind of caught in the middle. We're not a true Costa Mesa school, we're not a true Newport Beach school, but we're here to tell you that we do serve the city of Newport Beach and the students of the community. And again, we just thank the city council and the city for all the tremendous amount of support. Just as a side note, very quickly, Mr. Duffield, I had Travis at Ensign for 2 years when I was an English teacher in ASB, and we took that famous trip to Washington, D.C. and New York 6 months after 9/11. And City Council member Dixon, I had Wendy Lisa's daughter, your sister's daughter, 8th grade English at Ensign as well. So it's kind of nice to come full circle as the principal of Newport Harbor and see the other side of the Ensign equation, if you will. But again, thank you. Again, my name is Sean Bolton, Principal, Newport Harbor High School. Thank you for everything that you've done.
Okay. Stay there for a moment, please. Councilman Petros.
Yeah, Mayor Selich. Sean, I want to acknowledge while we're here together for the public, the change in attitude and the cooperation that's really gone on between Newport Harbor and the city. Under your leadership and the leadership of Dr. Navarro, I think we have started to really build some bridges that are paying dividends, as evidenced by the new crossing guards at 16th and Irvine.
Correct.
I think that there is an acknowledgement, and there's been work on your part to look at parking issues on the streets of Margaret, Hawley, and the like in the area, and I appreciate that. I think that it's not lost on me the value that facility provides to the community, whether we're talking about the Olympic level water polo when Hungary came and played the United States squad in the Newport Harbor pool, or when we're talking about the wonderful Battle of the Bays that happened at Davidson Field. Those are great rivalries that are historic. The jazz concerts in the summer are a wonderful time to just get out of the neighborhood and get over and see what the young people are doing. So I just want to say thank you for the level of cooperation. We are meeting now, I think quarterly, Mr. Kiff?
Yes.
With the representatives from the school district to keep tabs on the issues that we can solve together. And I look forward to that cooperative spirit as we look at other ways to make our relationship stronger and better for the community. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd just like to add that I think Newport Beach is fortunate to have two quality high schools in town, Corona Del Mar and Newport Harbor, and certainly proud of all the academic and athletic accomplishments at Newport Harbor. And I love the rivalry between the two high schools. It creates a lot of community spirit in town. So thank you very much for coming today. Really appreciate it.
And Mr. Mayor, don't forget that Newport Harbor High School is a little bit older and just a little bit better than Corona Del Mar.
All right. Any other comments from the council? Okay, thank you so much.
And again, just really quick, I want to piggyback on what Sean says. My name is Mike Schock. I'm the assistant principal at Newport Harbor. But it does take a village to run a high school, as I can imagine it does a city. So we really do appreciate the partnership, the Harbor Heritage Run, all of the partnerships that we have. It's been so valuable for our students and our community. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to study session item number 3. This is the concepts and approach for changes in the structure and fees for residential piers, commercial piers, moorings, leases, and leases versus permits. Since I have to recuse myself on the residential pier discussion because I own a residential pier, we're going to break it into 2 parts. The first part, we're going to have the presentation on the moorings and commercial piers, take public comment, and then give staff direction. And then for the second part, I will recuse myself, and Mayor Pro Tem Dixon will assume the chair and will do the same thing for the residential piers. And for council members, please remember we're using the queuing system to obtain the floor to speak, so be sure to click that request to speak icon on your screen to speak. And Councilmember Duffy, I believe you have a statement you want to make?
Yes, Mayor, I'm going to have to recuse myself as well. I guess I would, since you didn't break it out into 3 sections, I could have talked about the moorings, but I'm going to...
Well, we can do that if that works for you. Sure, absolutely. Dave, no problem breaking it into 3, right?
Oh, it's still? Okay. Never mind.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so staff.
So, Mr. Mayor and council members, Chris Miller is going to give the presentation. It is laid out as Mayor Selich talked about, and we'll certainly welcome your input in each step.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. We're going to just give a specific overview, let's say, of the 3 items: moorings, commercial piers, and residential piers. But first, I wanted to start off with some background to give some perspective as to what tidelands are and how they fit into this picture that we're talking about. Tidelands are public trust lands. They're owned by the people of California, and we have oversight and management was granted to the city by what's called the Beacon Bay Bill, which has been amended many times. Well, the Beacon Bay Bill was most recent, but the Tidelands Grant has been amended many times over its lifetime. It's also managed with respect to the California Constitution, the Public Trust Doctrine, and the City Charter and Municipal Code. Not all the waterways are public trust lands. There's some examples on the screen: Promontory Bay, Linda Isle Lagoon, some areas which are county tidelands, and some areas which we might call private waterways. The county tidelands can generally be referred, when you're thinking about it, the Harbor Patrol area, the harbor entrance area on Bayside Drive, and even a pocket of the Sea Scout Base and the Bay Shores Marina. There are some land areas which are considered public trust land, such as Marina Park and parts of Beacon Bay, and even the boardwalk around Balboa Island, which I'll show you a picture in just a moment, will illustrate that. This slide just gives a brief overview of how they're managed, describing what I just said in the previous slide: the hierarchy, the tidelands owned by the people, the California State Legislature governs them and gives the trust to the city. And then there's the State Lands Commission, who is in charge of overseeing our compliance with the Beacon Bay Bill. And then, of course, the city manages the trust, the public trust lands via the Beacon Bay Bill and Municipal Code and the California Constitution, et cetera. It's our obligation to comply with those documents that I just mentioned. And It is also our obligation to charge fair market value for the use of those public funds, lands. And it could be considered a gift of public funds if we were not to charge fair market value. And what we've been doing is reinvesting these funds back into the Tidelands Fund for improvement, management, and upkeep of the tidelands. This graph and I've got two graphs to give two different examples, but this shows what is defined as tidelands. And I'm going to use my cursor here to point. The tidelands are generally defined everything bayward of the bulkhead line. This orange line, a little faint orange line right here, is the bulkhead line. This line out here, the bayward-most yellow line, is the pierhead line. Anything bayward of the bulkhead line is considered tidelands. Now, conversely, anything landward of the bulkhead line would be considered private waterways. And I bring this specific example up because it's a bit unusual, and so I thought it was worth mentioning. You'll notice that the white dashed line on your screen is actually the property line for that particular house. And the property line extends out into the water. So that area right there is what we would call private waterways, and we're currently not charging for the square footage of the pier that is within that area. However, we are charging for the small area of the float, which is where my mouse is right here. We are charging for that because it's over tideland. So we divide up the pier and we look at each pier individually. The next example pretty much says the same thing, except I put this one to demonstrate the peculiarity, perhaps, of Balboa Island, and peculiar because the tidelands includes the boardwalk around Balboa Island. So everything landward of the green line, which is the boardwalk, you'll notice it's adjacent to the bulkhead line. Everything bayward of that is tidelands. This is just a quick one-slide recap of what we've done in the past and the time frames that we did. We first looked at moorings, and the quick one-sentence answer for that one would be, or summary on that, is that we adjusted the rates to represent 14% of the market basket of marinas, and we did a ramp up of those fees, and depending on the council's desire, 2015 would be the final year for ramping up to achieve 14%, and I'll get to a slide and go into that more detail. In addition, we ended the ability for mooring permittees to transfer their moorings unlimited. Now, until 2021, a mooring may be transferred 2 times. As for commercial piers, we increased the rate to fair market value. We have 5 years to go, and we adopted a lease template. And for residential piers, we also increased the rate to fair market value with 3 years to go. And we defined the footprint that we're charging, which I will also get into later. And then we reduced it in 2013 after another look back, as the council remembers. We also established a paper permit, which also allows for a long-term permit, 10 years if you should so desire. And we also made it legal to rent your pier if you would like. You just have to claim it to the city so that you can be charged accordingly. So the first topic that we'll discuss is our public moorings. This is a map that shows all the public moorings in Newport Harbor. Public moorings are more affordable than marinas, but certainly they're less convenient. Every mooring in the harbor has a permittee assigned to it. Now, you may look out at the harbor at any given day, and you might not see a vessel on every single mooring. That doesn't mean that there isn't a mooring permittee assigned to that. They just don't happen to have a boat, and they choose not to be using their mooring. However, they still maintain the mooring every 2 years, and they still pay the yearly fee. And that's actually a good thing that not all the moorings are filled, because the number one thing that we worry about and the Harbor Commission also worries about is derelict vessels. So it keeps the vessels that are becoming derelict. If we can encourage them that, hey, you don't need a boat, you don't need to keep a boat on your mooring, you can get rid of it and you'll still be fine. And that has cleaned up our mooring field over the years tremendously. There's a little over 500 moorings, offshore moorings. Offshore are the ones that are floating out in the center of the channels. They are either single point or double point. Single point means it has one buoy. Double point, there's a buoy in the bow and stern. And there are two county mooring fields. The largest county mooring field is the G Field right off of Bay Shores near Coast Highway Bridge. Largest, they only have, I think, about 18 there. And then the Harbor Patrol maintains some guest moorings over by their facility. We have some onshore moorings that are primarily located around Balboa Island, Lido Island, the peninsula street ends. And there's about 430 or 40 of those. And those are only for vessels that are 18 feet and shorter. This tells you what one of the major concerns that the mooring community had was transfers. And so this slide kind of recaps where we were before 2011, which was you were able to buy and sell your mooring privately with unlimited transfers, and there was no transfer fee. In 2007, the grand jury published a report that was critical of the city's management of the moorings. And because we had a wait list. And at the time in 2007, there were names, if I'm not mistaken, dating back to, I think it was 1970, maybe even a tad earlier than that. And the wait list did not move. The reason why the wait list didn't move was because the moorings were bought and sold privately, unlimited. And so no one would willingly give their mooring back to give it to somebody on the wait list. After 2011, the City Council decided that, as I previously mentioned, each mooring would be able to be transferred twice. And after 2021, there would be no transfers allowed except to immediate family. And if the permittee does want to get out of boating and doesn't want to maintain the mooring permit nor maintain the mooring and tackle every couple years, he or she would give it back to the city, and then we would in turn give it to the next person on the wait list. But since the mooring permittee owns the tackle, we would do evaluation of the mooring tackle, and we would basically buy the mooring tackle from that person. And then we would sell it to the next person on the wait list. Of course, you could always take your tackle and run if you wanted to and put it in your backyard, but no one would do that. The wait list really hasn't moved. I think we've had one or two moorings turned in over the past couple years, but that's about it. This slide looks like a lot to digest, but it basically outlines what the rates have been over since 2011 to where they are now. But I'll start at the top, and you might ask, where does the 14% come from? Well, it comes from an average moderate basket of marinas in Newport Harbor, and those are 7 marinas right there. And so what I do is I take the published rate, the book rate from those moorings, from those marinas, and I have a big spreadsheet, and I come up with an average price per foot, and then do some math and come up with the offshore rates. We started off between 1996 and 2010, the rates were $20 per foot per year for an offshore mooring. They're always half of that for an onshore mooring. So as the chart dictates here, or says, that in 2011, we went from $20 a foot per year to $26.52 per foot per year, and so on. I'll add that in 2015, our proposed rate is $55.43 for offshore, and then half of that for the onshore, which represents the 14%, which is the final step. Now, I need to say that we have held off on invoicing or billing the mooring permittees for 2015. Normally, we would send out those invoices in second week in January. And we've held off on doing that to see what direction the council would like for us to take. But at the bottom of the slide, you'll notice that I did a comparison of what, if you had a 40-foot vessel, what it would cost you using the proposed 2015 offshore rates. And the math works out to $2,217 per year, plus a maintenance cost. And every mooring varies on maintenance costs, but I've talked to a mooring contractor, and he says basically it's somewhere in the $350 a year, or rather every 2 years it's around $700 or $800. Versus a marina using the above listed rates, you would pay about $15,800 per year to have a vessel in a marina. So to me, that's a comparison of what a mooring is versus a marina. Also, there are short-term mooring rentals that the Harbor Patrol administers. The Harbor Patrol administers all the moorings on behalf of the city via contract. And there are 5 guest slips available at the Harbor Patrol's dock for $40 a night. And they also rent our moorings. Remember, the moorings that are vacant, when people do not have boats or they're on extended vacations, that mooring is vacant. So what we do is the Harbor Patrol rents that mooring out for the 1 night, 2 night, a week to anybody. And during the months of November and April, it's $16 a night, and it's $26 a night during the summer. That generates about $60,000 to $80,000 per year just in rental revenue. And the City Council decided that those rates, those fees would go back into the special fund that was created for the incremental revenue. The Avalon model has been looked at, and so we thought we would put some information here on the slide to let everybody know how they do it there. They've got about 362 moorings that are from very small to very large, and they are owned by individuals. Their fee is only $8.76 a linear foot per year versus ours proposed for 2015 is about $55.43. Their nightly rentals are $41, and their demand is high. Now, going back a few years, I don't know their current demand, but an example from a few short years ago, within maybe 5 or 6 years ago, a 70-foot mooring we heard sold for about $1 million. They have unlimited transfers, and the city receives 5% of the transfer price. Now, the Avalon approach may trigger a possessory interest tax. There is a difference in that the moorings in Avalon are what might loosely be called destination moorings, unlike Newport Beach, which is where we store our boats. It's a place for people who are boating in the general area. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Their lower rate in Avalon has some logic because the boats are not stored on the moorings, so they're not there all the time. Many of them. I'm sure there are some that are there all the time, but I'm speaking in general terms. And the rental revenue is a supplemental city income stream to the city of Avalon. So what they make in rentals might make up for the difference that we might charge on a per mooring, per foot per year basis, maybe. In Newport Beach, moorings we tried to price them between the cost of a dry storage slip and in-slip storage. Moorings are more convenient than dry slips, but less convenient than a wet slip. So one question that we would ask the council, if you'd like for us to look at more Avalon-style transfers, and we'd be happy to and research that further. Also, I would like to inform that the Mooring Master Plan Subcommittee of the Harbor Commission and the Harbor Commission itself This was the Mooring Master Plan Subcommittee was a committee that was in existence for easily 5 years, I would say. There's many people in the audience who were part of that. They recommended, and the Harbor Commission recommended, that there be one mooring transfer per year per individual, and that you can only own a maximum of 2 moorings per person, except if you're a marine contractor who might have a fleet of boats to maintain the harbor or other marine-related businesses, or for current permittees who have greater than 2. We wouldn't want to take them away. Surrendered moorings would go to a sealed bid auction and perhaps sunsetting the wait list after X amount of years. So at the end of each of our sections for moorings, commercial piers, and residential piers, we'll have a slide similar to this that asks a couple questions. Should we keep our current system or consider a change? Some things to consider might be, if we change, would you like us to change the rate? We can do that. We can adjust the percentage. That's fairly easy to do. We can change the rate method. Maybe there's another way to do this besides the market basket. We could change the procedures for allowing transfers. And we could change the allocation for overnight rental revenue. I don't think I have another slide. Yes. So this is my last slide of the mooring section. Be happy to.
We'll continue on with the commercial, then we'll take that all
Okay.
together.
Okay. So I am continuing on with the. This is an exhibit that shows all of the piers. I have to switch to pier mode. All of the piers, both residential and commercial. And I know it's confusing. You don't need to look at it too long, but it just demonstrates where the piers are and the different styles of piers that we have, from city, public trust lands, county, private, in both categories, commercial and residential. This slide narrows it down just to commercial, and so I will focus on this. The blue represents the public trust lands that are managed by the city. Those are the light blue. The yellow represents all of the county public trust lands by the county. We will call them county tidelands. And then the green represents the private lands. So that just shows you kind of where most of them are. When we charge for commercial piers, we charge for what I call the box of water in front of the property, meaning from side property line to side property line, and from the bulkhead line out to the end of the fingers. So that's a box of water right there. Oh, thank you. There is a reason that we charge for this box of water. And this is not new. We've been charging this for decades for the commercial properties. But there is a very good reason. You'll notice on the left hand of that box, there is a float, which is right on the property line. As a commercial marina, you are allowed to build your marina up to the property line, and you can put as many slips as you want. In this particular case, they have 2 giant slips, and they put many small boats in there. But this property could handle, 6 slips. You can do whatever you want with the box of water. You can put 1 or 6 or 10, whatever you can fit in there legally. You can use that box of water however you like. And conversely, I will say, jumping ahead just with one sentence, with the residential piers, you're only allowed 1 pier, 1 slip per house. So you're limited on how you can use that. Hence, that's why we only charge for the footprint of the pier. We don't charge for the box of water. And I will get into that in a moment. This slide shows all the different categories that we have for the commercial piers. If you're a large marina, which is over 15,000 square feet, or a small marina, if you're a charter boat operator, a boat rental, sport fishing, yacht club, gas dock, and so on. And you can see on the right-hand column the different rates that we charge for those different uses. For instance, shipyards. Shipyards are a water-dependent use, and there are a few shipyards in the harbor, and we would hate to see the harbor lose more shipyards. So the City Council decided to give them a very low fee to keep them around and encourage the shipyards. And you can see the fees are lower in other areas as well. This is
I'm sorry, Chris, could you go back one slide? So the fuel dock, though, is that per gallon or per square foot? I'm forgetting.
per gallon.
Per gallon. So that's a clarification on the slide then, that those two are per gallon.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, thank you. The next couple slides give an example of how we parse out those different areas for the commercial permittees on the previous slide. So we don't need to get in the details per se, but just if you look at the colors, you can see that we work with each one of the commercial pier permittees and say, okay, which docks, which slips are you using for charter boat rentals or for boat rentals, and which ones are you using for whatever. And so we asked them, are you okay with this figure? Great, because each one of the purple section, the blue section is charged a different rate. And so we proportion it out, or we actually divide it out as accurately as we can with their concurrence. Here's another example of Newport Harbor Yacht Club. It has many different uses. Actually, just has two different uses. But I'd like to point out the red area on the right-hand part of the screen. Notice that is landward of the bulkhead line. So that area is not considered tidelands. Therefore, we are not charging for that area. That's an important distinction. And likewise, on this area of Coast Highway, in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see red area shaded again, and that is also private waterways. So we're not charging for that. And you can see the yellow shaded area in the center of the diagram. That is for shipyard. That's a shipyard use. Commercial piers, they have an option of having either a one-year permit or a multi-year lease. And the fee is based on appraised value of two appraisals, which are listed right there by Gary Rasmussen and Netzer and Associates. So here's the second section, the end of the second section, and these are some questions for the council to consider. Is, you know, we could continue to offer a paper permit or a lease alternative. Would the council want us to keep it as it is or change it? If you would like a change, a new appraisal, or change the use categories, or any combination thereof. I don't think I have another. Yes, that's my last slide for.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, we'll now go to council comments and questions, and then after that, we'll take public comments. I'll start with Councilmember Muldoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Should I just go ahead and give comments now? I don't think I have any questions. Can I just give some comments?
Sure.
Thank you. So I've had an opportunity to speak with a lot of mooring holders and the mooring association here, Newport Beach, about this issue. It seems that they prefer the Avalon plan, which returns transferability to the user, but provides the city an opportunity to earn revenue at the transfer point. I personally think that's a wise plan, especially considering that another very reputable jurisdiction uses that plan. If you were to implement that, I could see the Harbor Commission's recommendations being acceptable as well, but I'll leave that up to my colleagues. I think the no boat requirement is excellent, so commend the staff on avoiding the derelict boat issue. I would like to address fees, perhaps just briefly, before I turn it over. It seems that the 14% structure is not incredibly logical, or it's sort of comparing apples to oranges. I think a better way to possibly look at this, if my colleagues are amenable, is to look at the competing marinas or other marinas that are comparable in Southern California for a more realistic price. I believe $30 a linear foot, excuse me, would be much more acceptable for this excellent alternative to more affordable boating. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Petros.
Thank you, Mayor Selich. A couple of questions. Can we go to the slides on the moorings? You mentioned the 2007 grand jury report having criticisms of our practice at that time. This is the same grand jury that also thinks it would be a great idea to expand John Wayne Airport, by the way. What was their issue, and what is the legal issue that they're bringing forth?
Councilmember Petros, so the grand jury report was getting into the wait list and the fact that it wasn't actually moving. And so their concern was whether it was taking a public asset and actually making it private. And so they wanted to change the system to encourage it to have more movement off the wait list and to take it away from a private right of transfer to make it go back to the city. So that's what led to, I think, to the city council's ultimate action to limit transfers.
Is there any
as part of
legal
the response.
definition or any direction that we would use to define policy that would take it from a public asset to a private by virtue of a wait list, though?
No, not at least in the Beacon Bay Bill and the Tidelands Grant. The City Council has flexibility to determine how they want to administer the tidelands, including the moorings, as well as the transfers. Any money or revenue that's derived from those moorings is deposited into the Tidelands Fund. But if your question is there anything guiding how that transfer needs to happen? No, you do have flexibility to determine it.
On the notion of using marinas for I tend to agree with my colleague, Councilmember Muldoon, on the notion of it looking like apples and oranges using a marina-based appraisal to arrive at moorings. And I would posit that at a marina, you have the convenience of being able to park your car and walk to your boat. So there's that. There's also other amenities and services that are at marinas that aren't at a mooring. I've visited friends on a mooring and had to row my own boat out there. What led to the use of marinas to arrive at the mooring charge?
That also was addressed in the grand jury report, to my recollection. They said you have to base it on something, so it should reflect, for instance, a similar experience at a marina, but discount it, in this case, by 86%.
Yeah.
That was the grand jury's thinking. And the appraisers didn't disagree with that concept.
Okay, thank you. There is, though, to Mr. Muldoon's point, there are examples of other communities that have mooring fields that we could look to and say, we're like that, and maybe that may be a better apples-to-apples comparison. Chris, do you have an opinion on whether there are other mooring fields that might be a better reflection?
I think there are. I don't know them off the top of my head. San Diego has a few. I can think of Mission Bay. Some mooring fields, like in Oxnard, Ventura area, might be seasonal. But I think we could probably come up with some sort of basket.
Okay.
We could try, certainly.
And then to the notion of the, pardon me, to the notion of the fee, I have had a number of pieces of correspondence where there's been an alleged 300% increase in the moorings from prior to this change. Yet, yeah, this slide, that doesn't show me 300%. Are you aware of any notion of a 300% increase in the charges at moorings in Newport Beach? Can we dismiss that as just being hyperbole, or?
Well, I guess they're taking the $20 and saying that a 300% increase would be $60 and it's $55, so it's a little bit less than that. But I can see how someone might be stretching it and saying that.
Okay. Okay, but we still could come back to another comparative,
Sure.
as Mr. Muldoon suggests, that might get us a better apples-to-apples comparison. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Curry.
Chris, we use the term mooring owner, but to be precise in language, do they actually own the mooring, or who owns the actual mooring? Isn't the city own the mooring?
Technically, I should be using the term mooring permittee, and I catch myself when I make that mistake. But to your question, the mooring permittee owns the mooring tackle, which is why the city would pay you for your tackle if you turned in your mooring.
The tackle's the line tied up to the can, more or less.
Yes,
Right.
and I'll explain what.
So let's just talk about the mooring though. So the mooring is not owned privately. It's public property owned by the people.
The mooring space is the public, the mooring area that it occupies. The physical buoy, chain, and weight are all privately owned by the mooring permittee, but the space that's what you're permitted to use.
Okay. So when I look at the chart here, it looks like the average cost for this 40-foot vessel works out to something less than $200 a month. Am I doing the math right?
Yes.
Okay. And so I notice here that for 14 years, these fees were not adjusted. Did someone come down from Mount Sinai with a stone tablet with these fees on them that caused them not to move, or what was the situation there? We just didn't do it.
I don't know the exact reasons. I wasn't around for many of those years, but they just didn't move.
Okay. And when we think about who is a permittee to have a mooring in our city, I understand that there's about 60% of the people who have moorings are people who are non-residents, people who don't live in the city.
That's about correct, yes.
And the number of residents who have a mooring is somewhere in the 400 range.
That's correct.
So out of 86,000 people, changing this would benefit 400 people.
Correct.
400 residents.
Correct.
And about almost 600 non-residents.
That's
Thank
correct.
you.
Councilman Piotr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chris, one of the concerns or complaints that I hear about the moorings is the fact that they feel like they lost equity, and the Avalon model brings that back. Have you done a comparison on the Avalon model as far as total revenue to the city using that scenario versus the current scenario?
No, I haven't.
Because I would presume you'd use a lower monthly rate, and then you'd have some money either in the overnight leasing or the transfer fees. So you'd still have a bottom line revenue that would come into the city. It's just that it would come in different forms.
Correct.
So I guess the question then comes down to, did the appraiser ever look at the Avalon model as far as what would be a market rate for that? What would be a reasonable transfer fee? What would be a reasonable monthly rate? Or, where would the monthly or the overnight guest fees go to? Does that go to the Harbor Patrol or does that go to the city?
I don't think the appraiser looked specifically at the Avalon model. To answer your last question, the fees for the rentals go back to the city, not to the Harbor Patrol.
Harbor Patrol just administers that.
That's correct,
and the fees come back to the city.
They issue us a check. I think with the loss of equity would be when the mooring permittees acquired their mooring for X amount of dollars, and they had an expectation that they would be able to sell it in many years.
So basically, in one fell swoop, we erased whatever equity they thought they had. What were the moorings going for, a typical 40-foot mooring in 2010 when we changed the fees? Do you know?
I would have to look back. If I gave a number, it would be a guess at this point, so I wouldn't want to say, because I don't know. At one point, and this is very long ago, maybe the mid-2000s, they were as high as $1,000 a foot. Now, that value has decreased just from looking at the ads in the newspapers now. I don't know what they're at now. I think many members in the audience could enlighten us.
Okay. And Mr. Mayor, are we going to take public input on this before we come back?
Pardon me?
Are we going to take public input on this at all?
Oh, sure, we are. Councilman Curry.
Well, just to use precise language, once again, equity implies a value from ownership. And there's no ownership of that here. The $1,000 a foot was not the result of the tackle. And in fact, they get the cost of the tackle back if they were to sell it to us, right? So there's no loss of the equity value of the tackle. What's lost is a presumed value of being able to transfer a public asset to another private party and put the money in your own pocket and walk away with it. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, sort of like if I put a trailer out on the beach and charge people rent for it, I'd probably make a lot of money because it's oceanfront property. Just really wouldn't be mine to rent, would it?
Correct.
Right.
Councilman Piotr, do you want to speak again?
Yeah, I was going to say, you can have equity in different ways. A leasehold interest still has an equity value. So just because the permittee doesn't actually own it doesn't mean that there isn't an equity value to it. So
We're not damaging his lease interest.
Mayor Pro Tem Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chris, thank you. Just some background questions from your summary. Could you explain, there was a mooring master plan subcommittee as well as the Harbor Commission. They
Yes.
made recommendations, and their recommendations were rejected by the council at that time?
Their recommendations in general terms are on the screen, and this is what they recommended, and we do not do this. Number 3, the moorings are surrendered, true, but they wouldn't go to a sealed bid auction. They would just be given to the next person on the wait list. The variation with number 1 is that committee and the Harbor Commission recommended 1 mooring transfer per year, and our current rules are 2 mooring transfers within the 10 years.
So Chris, what you're saying is that these recommendations were part of the documents and letters that were received by the council prior to action or post-action?
These were all these were incorporated in one form or another during the testimony during those many city council meetings.
Okay. I'm also intrigued with a different market basket, if you will, in terms of the rate setting, because I think a private marina has all the amenities that are very different from a mooring situation. So I would support that, to look at a different composition of that market basket. Also, you mentioned in the Avalon approach, it can trigger a possessory interest tax. Could you clarify what that means? Would that be a trigger similarly if we adopted this approach in Newport Beach?
So to answer, a possessory interest tax is a tax the county actually imposes when private individuals are using public property. So as a city, we wouldn't have any control over the county coming in and deciding to assess a possessory interest tax. But at present, our understanding is they're not doing so in Newport Beach, whereas they are in Avalon. But again, that would be a consideration for the county.
So
So it's
that's a
actually beyond us.
consideration. And then one other question to clarify my own thinking. Even though the mooring tackle, that part, as you described, and the buoy and the line is private, but the water surrounding is public. Is there an analogy with private residential docks to be made in terms of private residential docks are sold with the home, or typically, and they're part of the value of that private property or personal property? So my question is there a similarity there that it can go into a private marketplace as one would sell their home and their dock as well as their mooring and their tackle to create a private marketplace similarly to a private home? Is that analogy correct?
I'm not sure. I think I'd defer to the city attorney's office.
So, Mayor Pro Tem Dixon, you're absolutely correct. At present, if you do have a residential dock and you sell your home, the dock would transfer with the home. As far as an analogous situation, it's a little bit different in that if with the home you have an uplands property, so you have a property interest separate and apart from your rental of your tidelands fee. But I think if you spoke with some of the mooring permit holders, they would agree with your sentiment. But there is, I could see some differences as well as some similarities in your analogy.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Councilman Curry.
Just, the Mayor Pro Tem raises an interesting question. So to use your example, let's assume that the moorings in Avalon do, in fact, have a value of $1 million. And the possessory interest tax is an in lieu property tax, so the formula is the same, right? It's 1% of the property. So that's a $10,000 annual tax on that mooring in Avalon that people are paying to the county, that goes mostly to schools, some of it to the state and to the county, and not necessarily to be used in the Tidelands area. Is that accurate? So when we think about we want to go to the Avalon model with the possessory interest tax and base it on the value of what these moorings would trade for, people need to realize that that may very likely result in a much higher total cost to the mooring holder than the something less than $200 a month they're paying now.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll open it up for public comment. Please come forward and state your name for the record, please.
Well, I'm the closest one, so I'll go first. I'm Carter Ford, live in Newport Beach, have for some years, close to the water and enjoy many uses of the water. First, I'd like to express really my personal thanks to each and every one of you, and the staff for providing your time and talent and energy for making Newport Beach the best it can be. Doesn't mean we always agree about everything, but you've really worked hard, and I thank you personally. That said, I'm here to speak on behalf of the Newport Mooring Association. It's a very active group, been here for many, many years, has a board of directors. We've been, of course, looking at this very closely for the recent weeks when we realized that the council was possibly going to look at this again. With regard to where to go from here, what you're calling the Avalon model, which logically could be and should be refined to tie into the work that was done by the Mooring Master Plan Subcommittee. And I could laugh with you and say, well, for example, you changed the name when you were adopting that. It's Newport Beach, not Avalon. But there are features of each, and we do feel that what's good about the Avalon is that it's been in for many years, tried and true, and has worked. So that is something we would favor and hope that you will study. A little point of clarification, listening to the discussion, moorings in Newport Beach in the heyday of real estate growth in the marketplace and a much stronger market in the boating community generally, the highest we typically saw at the time, and that's some years ago now, was, as was correctly mentioned by Chris, might have reached $1,000 a foot, but the vast majority, we think, were maybe half of that. So to go to Council and Curry's comment, if you're transferring a mooring for $10,000 or $20,000, the possessory interest tax on that is going to be a pretty small number. So I don't think that the mooring folks are going to be that worried about that if it were to come to pass, and that's something we can't predict. With regard to fees, we have similar feelings about the basket issue that council folks have raised. We think that the harbors up and down the state of California, by the way, all of them, with the exception of with only a couple of exceptions, do allow transferability. And we would certainly agree that many of them are not anywhere near comparable to the quality of Newport Beach, both its harbor and the uses we enjoy here. But that said, the rates here, as proposed, are many multiples of what they've been and of what, with the exception of San Diego, other harbors are, as you've seen here, $9 a foot in Avalon. So we believe that, as has been suggested, that if you look at the comparison of rates for moorings in the varying harbors, with particular look at San Diego, I guess I'm done, that something in that range of $30 a foot would be well supported both by CPI and by the tidelands, the appraisals you already have for use of underwater tidelands. Thank you for letting me speak tonight.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. No other speakers?
Mayor Selich and members of the council, my name is Jim Mosier, and if I understood correctly, the topic at the moment is not just moorings, but also the commercial piers. And I know that the new council members haven't expressed an interest in improving the city's transparency, so I wanted to call those new members' attention to a matter that may seem slightly off topic, but it's related to transparency, it's related to harbor fees, and it's related to the lawsuit that I see will be on your closed session agenda later this afternoon. This has to do with the issue of piers encroaching in front of other people's property and impairing their enjoyment of the harbor. The city has a long-standing policy that when an encroaching pier owner's property changes hands, the continuing propriety of the encroachment is supposed to be reestablished by the issuance of a new permit reviewed by the Harbor Commission. However, when in January 2013, the city staff presented an ordinance that supposedly implemented the decisions the council had made at that last very highly contentious meeting about harbor fees in the old city council chamber, the staff, seemingly on its own, inserted a poorly thought out new section to the harbor code that could be read as exempting the commercial piers from the long-standing transfer approval requirement, which led to the lawsuit. I don't think most of the council knew that language was there, and the public certainly didn't know it was, because the ordinance said it was about fees, not encroachments, which is a really completely different subject that one would have thought would have been referred to the Harbor Commission for discussion and a recommendation. The council later amended the confusing new passage in an attempt to clarify that the staff's intent had been only to allow the commercial property owner to apply for an encroaching pier without the other landowner's advanced permission, but not that they would be granted the permit or allowed to transfer it without further review. I would hope this council, in reviewing fees again, will continue to defend the city's policy requiring review on transfer of all encroaching piers, and that if it wants to improve transparency, it will make sure in the future that when an ordinance the public is told is about harbor fees, that that ordinance is really confined to fees and does not contain in it unrelated changes that have not been exposed to full and proper public debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
My name is Brad Avery, and just to give you some perspective, my father purchased a mooring in this town in 1962 for $10,000. And at its peak, before the last go-around with the council and reset all the rates, it was probably worth $50,000 to $55,000. I inherited the mooring in 1998, and I sold it 3 years ago for $18,000. I would have liked to have had $55,000, but my view on this is I do not believe that individuals should profit from the sale of public rights, basically, is my view. So the most important thing here is that we provide a low-cost alternative for people to enjoy boating in Newport Harbor, and that is really about the rates. I don't think, and I don't know how you do this, but I don't think people should make $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 just because they held the permit to have a mooring. And I've got a lot of friends here tonight that aren't going to like this, but that's just my feeling on it. I think this is public trust. I think it, in some ways, dents the ability for people to do low-cost boating if they have to pay $30,000, $40,000 up front that you can't possibly get financing for to get a mooring to keep a boat in Newport Beach. So there's more to it than that. To me, the most important thing is affordability and turnover, a way for the list to move or some other mechanism so people from the outside looking in feel they have some chance, some opportunity to have a boat in Newport Beach. And right now, even with the changes, that's somewhat stymied, as Chris has pointed out. So that's just my view, and I don't really have solutions of how to set that up.
Pardon me, Mayor Selich. Brad, you are one of our harbor commissioners, and
I'm speaking.
I'm not going to let you off, though, by saying you don't have an idea here. I'm wondering if that question of transferability and cost were remanded back to the Harbor Commission to consider, do you think the Harbor Commission could come up as specialists with an idea?
Well, I've met with the mooring owners on other issues. This is a hard thing to untangle, but the short answer is yes. I mean, we'd be happy to look at it. We've met with the mooring owners, and I consider all the mooring owners my friends. I've known a lot of people out in the moorings, but we've just got to keep focused on the goal, I believe, of offering low-cost alternative, and that means really the monthly rate. And then how do we get so the moorings are transferring at a healthy rate? That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Brad. Other comments?
Council, my name is Mark Seitz. I've had a mooring since 1977. I felt compelled to just answer Brad's concerns. I was the epitome of low-cost public access when I bought my first boat. But the nice thing was I was able to build the cost of the mooring into the total finance cost of the boat. So it came as a package, and so I was able to have a boat and an affordable place to keep it. So I think a lot of people that do have equity in their moorings may have built that into the total cost of the boat when maybe the boat and the mooring were transferred. So what they're asking is, I've paid for the mooring. Can I please have my money out of it and not have it degraded by government interference? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Other comments?
Richard Dorn, mooring permit holder, liveaboard permit holder. A question I've always had is the equitable requirement that's required in administrating the tidelands. We have a fee that's at least 3 times as much as the private pier holders. Most of the piers will accommodate 2 boats. Moorings only 1 boat. Now the pier holders can rent their 2 spaces. As mooring holder, we cannot rent our space. We cannot have a guest on our mooring for more than a month at a time. And the fact that mooring permit holders, 60% are out of the city, does not mean that they should be charged more than the people that have the city. It's supposed to be equitable. Whether they live in the city or not, the users of the tidelands are supposed to be equitable. It's supposed to be balanced out evenly with not one user paying more than another. Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott Carlin, I'm a mooring holder, also former Commodore South Shore. A lot of our members have moorings. It's what makes boating affordable. A lot of people are able to use the harbor because of that. I want to talk a little bit about apples. There seems to be an impression that you can have your boat on a mooring for about $200 a month. That's not quite true. I spend about $1,000 every other year to maintain the mooring. And while some people may say it's $500 or $600, you're going to have to replace the ball, add the weights, and all that kind of stuff. So you got to add that cost. If you look at San Diego, which is the closest apple to apples, San Diego will provide you with a full-time dinghy dock, so your boat is not confiscated after three days. To rent a dinghy dock for the smallest boat will cost about $200 a month. Probably $400, but I'm being conservative. So if you're looking at San Diego, which provides you effectively a permanent dinghy dock, you can leave your boat there for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, go on vacation and come back or whatever. You have that amenity. And San Diego also maintains the tackle. So they're paying that $1,000 every other year. So if you are going to look at San Diego, look at the actual cost and the net. So it's costing us $200 plus another $50 a month to maintain the tackle, and another, wherever we're keeping our dinghy, if we're going to keep it there for more than 3 days, it's going to cost upwards of $200, and that's a true comparison. So the total cost to an average mooring owner, unless they're a liveaboard and they're changing their boat out every 3 days, is closer to about $500 a month, $400 a month. And if you take that ratio to a marina, it's not quite working out. When they originally did the study, they did compare San Diego, but they didn't add those amenities or the extra costs. So they took the San Diego cost and looked at the ratio of San Diego to the San Diego marina. They failed to put in the fact that you've got the dinghy dock cost, or they were giving you that, and they were maintaining the moorings. So I'm just saying, if you're going to use the apples to apples, make sure you're making the appropriate adjustments so it's a true picture of the cost of owning a mooring. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one, I'll bring it back to council. Before I get into discussion, I'll just make a couple of comments. Councilman Curry and I are the only two members of the council that were here when we adopted the current system. Just want to make a couple of points on it because we did spend quite a bit of time discussing and studying this in the past. And one of the things that we tried to do in the new system we come up with was to amortize the so-called equity. As Councilman Curry pointed out, it really isn't equity other than what you had in the mooring in terms of ownership, but there was a perceived equity from the transfers that had been taking place among the private market for these moorings. So we came up with the amortization schedule as a way to help soften the blow and provide some means of amortization of that equity. In coming up with the rate, we chose the marinas in Newport Harbor as the most rational way to approach this. We looked at many different ways, discussed many different types of systems. We looked at the moorings fields in other harbors, and I don't believe there's another harbor that has a mooring situation similar to Newport Beach. We're unique. And it's hard to take a mooring in Santa Barbara or Ventura Harbor where the marina rates are much lower per lineal foot and say that the moorings, that we should peg our moorings to the value of the moorings in that harbor when the going rate for all the other services in the harbor, primarily the slip rentals, are much lower. So it seemed to us to make the most sense to peg the rental rates for these moorings on some basis on what boat slips rented for in Newport Harbor, because we are our own unique market. The other markets are not comparable to ours. And we went through and looked at all the rates that were charged in all the different mooring fields. There really aren't that many elsewhere, and there certainly are not any mooring fields as large as the ones we have in our harbor. And the last point I'd like to make is that it was the feeling that by going to this system, we would meet the obligations that we have through the public trust doctrine, as well as the policies and goals that we've put in our local coastal plan, that we would increase the affordability of the moorings by promoting more transfer of the moorings. The moorings weren't moving to new people. They were being sold on the private market, but they weren't going to people that would just come up on a waiting list. The waiting list never moved, and this would be a way to help increase the affordability of these moorings in the harbor. So those were the principles that were behind us, and anyone can go back if you want to get into more detail and read and look at all of the documents that were produced during those discussions and the testimony that took place. But I think it's important to remind everyone that there was a theory and a philosophy behind the development of the system that we now have in place. So with that, any other? Mayor Pro Tem Dixon.
Since, Chris, thank you, Mayor. Since the rates have been increasing over the last few years, what is the status? Have we lost mooring? Have people turned them in? Or what's been happening just to reflect the increased pricing that was intended to increase affordability, but what is the situation in terms of how people are hanging on, retaining ownership or leasehold of their mooring?
We've only had about one or two, give or take, people turn in their moorings back into the city. I think I can remember two. And
have there been an increase in transfers at the same time? I mean, in private transfers?
I don't know the answer to that question. The transfers don't go through me personally, so I just don't know if they do. The Harbor Patrol will be able to tell me that in a minute, but I don't have the answer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm getting the sense just from up here that the comments that are made that there's probably at least 4 council members that are in favor of considering a change. Yes?
I'm looking at the rates. I'm looking at that.
Okay, Tony, I know you are. You just.
But you raise you raise an interesting point that was lost on me before. So if the action is to go back and look at change, I'm not just going to go headlong into, hey, let's make this change, for grins. What I'd like to see is if there is a reason to look at alternative mooring fields, I'd like to see what the marina costs are, the marina charges are in those harbors as well. Because if Ed brings up a very good point, if there is greater demand or value for a boat slip in a commercial or other dry storage, whatever, in Newport Beach rather than Santa Barbara or Ventura, that has a lot to say about the value of the moorings as well. So, yeah, I think, I know you've done the work once, but I wasn't there for that, so I'd like to see that work. But, yeah, I think we should be looking at the rate, but looking at it in the context of not just mooring to mooring, but mooring to harbor. What the value is of those harbors that we're going to use as I am interested in a transfer procedure. I do like something along the lines of an Avalon system, but something that is more beneficial or reflective of the Newport experience. So I would do that.
Okay, Councilmember Muldoon.
As I'm aware, the wait list is not required by code, and though it's a nice concept to have wait lists, that's not the point of this. This is the point. The point is that we're to have a affordable alternative for people who can't necessarily afford to have their own slip or a marina. I don't like the elitist mentality. I think we should be humble and say, we have a great harbor, but let's charge the market rate. So I personally support a more reasonable market rate, and I support the mooring holders and their desire to have the Avalon plan. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Councilmember Curry.
Well, the real problem we have is that we went for 15 years and didn't adjust these fees at all, and so it appeared to be a large increase when it actually happened, and that's on us. When you look at it, though, in total, it's actually a fairly reasonable cost given the overall alternatives of keeping a boat in Newport Harbor. I would say to my friends who think that the Avalon way, that where you impose a possessory interest tax on your situation, is a better way to go. The tax rate's going to be 1.25% or so on the value of your boat. It'll be reassessed when the next guy next door to you sells his at perhaps a higher cost. It's something you're going to pay every year. It'll go up 2% each year with the county adjustments because you'll have to be dealing with the county tax assessor every year who will be out trying to get money because that goes to the county. And I think when you look at that, even if we do cut the fees, you'll end up paying an overall total cost. This is sort of a half-baked idea that's getting served out there, and I think people are going to really regret the economics and the mathematics of it when you see how it happens in real life. Now, the council did a tremendous job under difficult circumstances in coming up with a fair formula that was phased in over several years to get us to where we are today. And in terms of transferring moorings, remember, these are public property assets. I think Brad Avery had it exactly right. People were making $40,000 a year. That was the testimony we heard at the council in terms of what people paid for their moorings. And under the Brooklyn Bridge theory, I guess we let them sell it to somebody else if they'd buy it 2 more times to enable them to amortize that cost out. But that's what's really affecting us in terms of the cost of affordability, I would say to my colleague, Mr. Muldoon, is that the cost of that mooring is going to be a lot more expensive if you're paying those kinds of prices for it, irrespective of what the monthly rate is. So that's what we need to be concerned about in terms of trying to provide an affordable alternative in the harbor. And if we're going to do anything like this, we should allow the Harbor Commission to take its time to study this carefully and to look at all of these various angles before we have the law of unintended consequences come up here and bite a lot of these folks in a place they hadn't anticipated. And I would also again point out that this affects about 400 Newport Beach residents. Nearly 600 of the moorings are held by people outside of our city. We welcome them to our city like we do the 100,000 people who come each day to use the beach. But they do park on our streets. They do use our city services. And this is an equitable way to fund the costs that they incur.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I think it sounds like that the majority would like to consider a change to the system, that we do some study on it, and the suggestion has been made that we refer it back to the Harbor Commission.
And one clarification, Mr. Mayor.
Pardon me?
given that, is it your council's intent to authorize us to not apply the next fee increase for moorings? So we'd put that on hold?
Well, I think we should stick, my personal opinion is we stick with the law that's on the books and refer it to the Harbor Commission. And I don't want to sound flippant on this, but one of the reasons that the council assumed a greater role in this process before was it just drug on for years between various committees and everything, and maybe having the rate structure in place will give some incentive to get this resolved one way or the other.
I see Tony's head nodding, so that, Diane's okay. Thank you. Any questions on staff's part of what we're looking at here? Just so we know.
Well, we've talked about moorings a lot.
No, but just, is there any question on the council's direction right now? Otherwise, no. Okay,
We're
great.
only talking about moorings. Okay, so the next area then is commercial piers.
Move to that slide, Chris.
And we haven't had a lot of public testimony on the commercial piers, nor a lot of discussion up here, so I don't see anyone requesting to speak. So is there any desire to revisit our process on commercial piers? Okay, I don't see any desire there, Dave, so.
Thank you. We'd move to the next one then. It
Okay.
is 514. Was our undergrounding project may be delayed a little bit here. We'll see how it goes.
Okay, well, at this time, I'll recuse myself, and Mayor Pro Tem Dixon will assume the chair.
As that happens, is there anybody in the audience that came for the undergrounding presentation? Could you
Are
show
we
your
doing
hands?
resident?
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Are we doing residential?
Yes.
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 Okay, I will resume my PowerPoint here, and I'll try to speed it up so we're not here any longer than we need to be. This slide just shows, again, the pictures of where the residential piers are. You've got public trust lands managed by the city, county in red, and private in green. So it gives you a snapshot of what we're looking at in our harbor. There's about 882 residential piers over public trust tidelands, 330 over other waterways, and about 144 over county. The other waterways in the county, we're not charging them, whereas we used to charge for every single pier, whether they were over private, county, or city tidelands. And the city council decided that it was right and fair to charge just for city tidelands starting in 2013.
Just to clarify, the charge we did have was not rent. It was an administrative fee charge that staff used to keep records of the different piers and maintenance. It was not rent.
Thank you. In 2013, the residential piers were charged for a footprint. And if you recall, in 2010, there was a 10-foot buffer zone that we used. But then later on that year, in the city council, they pledged to look back at that issue after a period of months. And we did. And we had outreach meetings and came back to the council and determined that we would charge for just the actual footprint. So now I'm going to go into what the footprint looks like. And first, on the left-hand side of the screen are just three components to a pier, so we're on the same page as to what makes up a pier. I use the word pier in a general term because the pier is the stationary area of a pier system that does not rise and fall with the tide. Then you have the gangway, which connects the pier to the float, and the float, of course, rises with the tide. We are charging now for that footprint, which is in the area on the left side of your screen, is shaded in green, which is the pier, the gangway, and the float. On the right side, conversely, well, not conversely, in addition, when you have a U-shaped float, not everybody has a U-shaped float, but when you do, we charge for the inside of the U-shaped float because more than likely you would have a vessel in the center part of the U-shaped float that would be exclusive to your use. A couple more slides just giving you a little bit different scenarios of what the footprint looks like for the various types of piers in the harbor. The one on the left is where the float is perpendicular. In fact, there is not a pier on the picture in the float. It just consists of a gangway and a float. The gangway is connected to the seawall. And then on the right-hand side is another example. And then lastly, you have a very small example of a pier platform on the Grand Canal, which is 44 square feet. And then in West Newport, you have also a very small pier, gangway and float. Typically, they are in that very small 107. They're under 200 feet, most of them, square feet. So prior to 2013, residential piers were charged a flat $100 fee regardless of their size, and you could not rent your pier. But 2013 going forward, we decided, as I just explained, to charge for the footprint. And you are allowed to rent out your pier. And if you do rent out your pier, it would be incumbent upon you to let the city know so that we could then charge you the small marina rental rate. If you recall from the previous slides long ago this afternoon, the small marina rate is under 15,000 feet. And the logic there was that if you are having a business, i.e. renting out your pier over the tidelands, then it would make sense to pay the same rate that the marina up the street on Coast Highway is also charging. The table at the bottom represents the average permit fee applied to piers over public trust lands. And not to get too much in the weeds, but this number, because of the formula, it does fluctuate slightly by a penny or two. The bottom line is at 2017, everybody will be at 52.5 cents per square foot. So this is just an average rate for those that have calculators at home looking at their invoices. This is a table which not meant to look at and scrutinize line by line, but I think it's important, and it shows on the left column, it shows groupings of square footage in 200-foot groupings. In the center, the number of piers, it shows a number of piers in Newport Harbor that are city piers that fall within that range. And then on the right, it shows what those fees would be for that grouping, approximately, in 2017, fully phased in. So if we look at the about a third of the way down, 1,000 square feet to 1,200 square feet, there are 42 piers in Newport Harbor that are within that category, and on average, or approximately, they're paying $630 per year. And so you can look and you can see where the numbers are over 100, they're in the 600 to 800 and below square footage. And then a lot of them are, they go up to about 1,800 to 2,000 square feet. You're in the 30s and 40s, and then they drop down significantly. Residential pier permits, they have existed for a long time. Having a permit is not a new concept. How the city administers that permit and how we account for that permit is what changed. Harbor Resources, we maintain the pier permits in our office, and the pier permit simply was very crude and archaic, admittedly, and it consisted of a construction drawing that was in our file. Whenever you would rebuild your pier, you would have a new construction drawing, and that new construction drawing would have a stamp on it, and voila, that would be your pier permit. It wasn't really very scientific or official. And that threw a lot of people for a loop, particularly realtors, brokers, and residents themselves, who would call us up or come into our office asking, I'd like to see a picture of my permit. What is it? And I'd have to kind of go through this story of, well, this is your construction drawing, this is really your permit. So we memorialized the permit with a one-sheet permit, and it's more official looking, and that's on the next slide. So this is what it looks like. It's a one-page permit. We also, as a side note, classified HOAs as residential. We changed that. They used to be classified as commercial. It allows for rental to third parties. You can also have a 10-year permit. So the folks who want a 10-year permit have called us up and said, please sign me up for the 10-year permit. There's not an extra fee, or there's not a reduced fee either. There's no requirement at all. It's just that we will invoice you every 10 years instead of every year. The annual fee ramps up to $52.50 per square foot just for the area over tidelands in 2017. I'm going to spend the next couple slides talking about what the State Lands Commission does versus what the City of Newport Beach does. So on the left, you see the Newport Beach approach, which is the green outline I've showed before, which shows the pier gangway and the U-shaped float being charged. On the right side of the screen, you see the State Lands approach, which charges for, remember I was using the box of water approach? Well, this is how they do it for their residential piers. So the left side of the column is what I've already said, how the Newport Beach does it, with the choice of the annual or long-term permit. On the right side, where it says the State Lands Commission approach, they charge for everything. They do not include, if you have a cantilever deck, they do not include the square footage for that deck. And the next slide will show you a real-life example. Their lease rate is 33.331 cents per square foot per year. And they're usually 10-year leases with a CPI adjustment. So now we'll get into some numbers. Oops, this is a screen which refreshes your memory on what it looks like, and then now we'll get into the numbers. So currently in Newport Beach, if your pier is 1,917 square feet, you times that by 35 cents a square foot, which is where we're at now, approximately, and you get an annual fee of $670.95. At the end of the phase-in, at 52.5 cents, that fee would be $1,006 a year. Now, conversely, the State Lands approach, you come up with the square footage, subtracting out the cantilever deck, because I think there's a lot in Huntington Harbor, and you do the math, and you come out with $1,112 per year. So that's a little bit of difference, but it's not really an apples-to-apples comparison, which we do on this slide. For an apples-to-apples comparison, if you were just to look at the rate from a rate perspective, you would need to take the box of water for that Via Lido Sud residence. So we did that. And if you take 50 feet wide by 100 feet out in the bay, that's 5,000 square feet, times 331 square feet, which is the rate that state lands charge, you would come out to $1,655 a year today versus the $1,006 by 2017 using the Newport Beach approach. This is, that's pretty much the last slide, which is the straw vote, which would be, does the council want to A, keep the current system, or B, change it? And if you would like to change it, some ideas that we've thrown out are to add language protecting the dock owner's rights to prevent seizure of dock. Any other changes? Should we change the pier, the permit footprint? We have three components. We have the float, the gangway, and the pier. We can add and subtract any one of those three. Should we include the inside of the U-shaped dock? Or should we just follow the outline of the dock? And the rates. Currently, the rates were comprised by two surveys. One survey valued the tidelands for residential piers at 50 cents a square foot, and one valued it at 55 cents a square foot. So we took the exact center, the average, the middle of the road, and that's how we came up with the 52.5 cents per square foot. What other means could we use to do that? That's our question. And then something just to ponder is what will the State Lands Commission, how would they opine on this, if at all? And I think I have one more. So maybe we might talk about this, and then as a last wrap-up, it's how would you like for staff to proceed?
Thank you, Chris. Council members, Councilmember Muldoon, do you have any questions or statement?
Yes, I do. Again, like in the last situation, when I listened to the mooring holders, this time I met with many residential dock owners, and I think that their opinion should matter because they're citizens, they're taxpayers. It's easy for us to just impose higher rates on people, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. I believe in limited government, and I believe that the money of taxpayers should primarily stay in the taxpayers' pockets. So it's a pleasure to propose these alternatives to using the harbor and to protect people's property rights. That being said, there is a settlement agreement between the dock owners and the city that offers a long-term lease to protect that pier. And from most of the dock owners I spoke with, they had no desire to risk that protected lease land interest. I understand their fear of losing more of their rights, and I support their position. I believe, after speaking with a lot of them, that a good gesture and a reasonable thing to do regarding the footprint would be to eliminate the gangway and the water charge for the U shape within the dock. That area space, it's you can't really exclude the use of it, as someone may enter that space if they would like. And the gangway is really for access to the utility, which is the actual pier. Given my feeling about rates and taxes, I of course would like to see us revert to a lower end of the appraisal, but still an amount that's respected by the State Land Commission and would be considered appropriate given the market. So with that being said, I personally propose the elimination of the gangway, or I support elimination of the gangway and the reduction of the U-shape part of the dock and reversion to the lower rates. Thank you.
So just so that everybody understands, when the State Lands Commission imposes these fees, they result in a higher cost to the dock owner than we have in our own city. Is that correct?
Yes, as my one example illustrated.
And the same would be true if we looked at the State Lands Commission administration of Lake Tahoe. Are they not also higher than what we charge here?
Dave?
I looked at that in 2012 and 13, and generally the states, there's about 10 examples I did of Huntington Harbor as well as Lake Tahoe and the Sacramento River Delta, and they're all higher because they do include the buffer footprint, for instance, in Lake Tahoe.
Mm-hmm. And the state's not obligated to spend any of the money that they collect in Huntington Harbor. They can spend it in the tidelands any place in the state of California. Is that accurate?
So, yes.
So by virtue of our administration, you were able to keep this money focused on the harbor itself, right?
Yes.
So again, you have to look at who does this actually affect. It affected about 1,200 people when this was looked at. We figured out about 400 of them were not actually on public tidelands, so they went from paying $100 a year to paying $0. So of the remaining 800, it looks like almost 600 of them here pay about $400. They're paid in that lower quadrant of what we have here. So there's, we do have people, as I understand it, with 16 boats on their own dock. We have people with 6 boats. We have people with 9 boats. That's, there's not a lot of them, but there are some like that. Is that correct?
Yes.
So when we did this, we did 2 appraisals, very cognizant of the fact, and based on state's own auditors' reports, that if we did not set a rate that reflected fair market value, if we did not set a rate that reflected, what the value of this was, that we were in jeopardy of having the State Lands Commission come in and administer them or amend the Beacon or seek to amend the Beacon Bay bill to give them jurisdiction here, which would have the effect of jeopardizing the cost that everybody in the harbor pays. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So before we sort of pull numbers out of the air, we need to be cognizant of the fact that doing so creates a record that can be challenged by the State Lands Commission and by others who may want to come in here and extract money from Newport Beach to spend in other parts of the state. Is that a fair description of the risk?
It's a reasonable, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Petros.
Yeah, I concur with Councilmember Curry's assertions there. Remember, this was a piece of legislation that was brought by an assembly member from the Calabasas, Agora Hills area to simply backfill the general fund of the state. Had nothing to do with the quality of the tidelands or any harbors or any riverways in California. It was a backfill into the general fund of the state. However, we have that stewardship ability in Newport Beach. And it would be foolish of us, and in fact, it would be counter to our fiduciary obligations to in any way risk that stewardship, because dollar for dollar, that money goes back into the tidelands to the benefit of the users of the bay. So before we do anything, I think that we need to tread very cautiously and carefully that we don't wake the beast and have something taken away from us, and then have every penny that those residential dock owners would invest back in the bay go up to Sacramento. Having said that, could you please go back to the straw vote issue? I don't believe that the issue of the permit language preventing seizures would be something that would raise the ire of state lands, and I would agree with Council Members Muldoon's assertion to change that. The gangway, I kayak, I stand-up paddle. There is no way that you can suggest that the public right-of-way is available to me by somebody's gangway. Therefore, that is an encumbered piece of state lands and should be paid for by the person that's encumbering it. I can't get by it. I can't get through it in the water. So no, I don't agree that the gangway should be removed. But the U-shape, if it doesn't risk the ire of the state lands, I don't see why that should be part of the fee. We should be charging for the area over the water that is encumbered. And then in terms of the rate, each of those figures represents an appraised value by a professional, and I would go with whatever would be deemed appropriate. I could go with the 50 cents a square foot, again, so long as we don't risk losing the wonderful ability we have with the stewardship of that bay.
Councilman Piotr.
Sounds like Councilman Petros agrees with Mr. Muldoon, except for the gangway, with the big caveat that we don't want to risk the state tidelands, and I would concur with that.
And for my comments, going down the list, I think the permit should be adjusted. I don't have a problem with that. The permit footprint, the U-shape, I think makes sense. And the rates, whatever is the fair assessed value, I tend to always want to keep taxes or assessments on the low end. I would go with the lower rate. That's where I am, I guess. Have we?
Do you want to take
Councilman
some public
Curry,
comment
did you want to speak?
too? Sorry.
Well, I would say, I think we've worked hard we created this lease document. So I agree with the whole thing about seizures of docks. We don't plan to seize anybody's docks, and I don't think there's a problem in doing that. I will just say that we had Harbor Commission input, we had a council committee's input, we had multiple hearings across the city to make these decisions, and then we went back after a year and looked at them and altered them again on the basis of real-world experience. So we were very thoughtful, we were very methodical, and we were very solicitous of input from the community in making these decisions. We didn't sort of do it by going down the line here and everybody, telling them what we thought we would do on this great Tuesday morning. So I would just caution my colleagues that this should be done with caution and with deliberation.
Could we open it up for public comment, please?
Brad Avery. Just a couple of comments. If you look at it, moorings to the people that have slips in front of their homes, the mooring owners aren't getting a good deal, and they're paying a lot more for a 40-foot boat on a mooring than someone in their slip. On the other side of it, as we all know, homes sell for quite a bit more with a dock in front of them than if they don't. And I think any realtor would tell you what that number is. I think is in the hundreds of thousands. So the people with homes with docks in front of them are paying tax, if you will, by virtue of the increased value of the slip. And how you mix that into it, I'm sure the previous Harbor Commission, before I got there, figured that out. But there is something going in there from a homeowner with a dock in front of his house, and it's, if someone bought a new house, it could easily be $300,000 or $400,000 in value on Lido Island, which would translate into pretty hefty fee every year. So just a couple of considerations to make in this.
Any other comments?
Hi, my name is Joy Brenner, and I have absolutely no horse in this race. I have lived here 53 years. I've never had a boat. I don't intend to own a boat. I have friends with very large boats that I get to enjoy occasionally. My only concern about this discussion, and I'm not going either way on it, but Keith, you know that people have been critical in the past of how much money we spend on City Hall and how much in debt we are and that sort of thing. And I think the new council, and I voted for all of you, rode in on a wave of this city being financially responsible in the future. And my only concern, whatever way this goes, is that your responsibility is to get the highest amount of income for city property, which goes into our funds, which pays for the amenities that we all enjoy here. And if we want to pay down the debt on the city hall and whatever else, I don't think any group of us, although I'd love for you to just choose to give me a lower rate on some bill I have here, I don't think any group of us has the right to ask for special privileges, and that we all have the right and the responsibility of paying the right value for what we get from the city. And, so I'm not on anybody's side in this. I just think that the new council members really did ride on in this wave of financial responsibility, and that you guys have a right to vote for what helps us to pay down our debt at a fair value to all the citizens. And so, I don't know if that made any sense or not, but that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, Mark Seitz again. Speaks to what Mr. Avery and the previous lady just said. You should get fair value. And also, if you've noticed, the moorings and the dock owners do pay different rates. We, at the Mooring Association, did ask for an appraisal on many occasions. This addresses what Mr. Curry said. What happened for 15 years? There was a time that we were promised appraisals on several occasions and never received them. So finally, an in-house appraisal was done. And I think that's one of the bones of contention here, is that the in-house appraisal did not match what any of the appraisers could professionally do. It was just sort of a seat of the pants appraisal. It could be justified, or it could be disputed. But I just wanted to give you a little history, and Mr. Curry, I do have a history of that, why it didn't increase for 15 years, if you're interested. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other comments?
My name is Jim Parker, and I actually I have a question of Chris. Chris, these 1,200 residential docks, how many have declared commercial?
13.
13 out of the 1,200. Is there any monitoring or enforcement to see that this isn't being, someone isn't violating this ordinance?
No, we don't have the resources to individually check CF numbers against owners against where the boats are.
The Harbor Patrol couldn't just make a random checks of CF numbers and documentation and so on to run through the record to see if it matches the property owner?
Well, respectfully to the Harbor Patrol, their job is law enforcement, and they're focused on other areas of law enforcement for the harbor. And then you would have to wonder, is that vessel there just on a friendly basis as a favor to a friend, or is that vessel being charged?
Yeah, typically enforcement is complaint driven as opposed to an active investigation.
Is it your view and your heart and mind that this 13 is an accurate count?
I think the number is higher. I think the number is higher.
I think it's a lot higher. I think it's a lot higher. And of course, this change has put, potentially 1,200 slips into the commercial area, and obviously there's not going to be anywhere near that. But but I think it's, I know it's significantly larger than 13. I don't know the number either. I might, do my own research if I can, but it is difficult. So, but there are a lot of slips now that have been put into the commercial area, while at the same time the commercial marinas have had, from small marinas, roughly 500%, 5 times going up, over being phased in. Large marinas probably something like 6.5 times increase in the Tidelands fee. Also, we have an insurance requirement that will double our insurance costs, and we have an indemnification clause that says, that is telling us that we have to indemnify the city against all risks. The city gets to, if we run into a problem here, the city is able to choose the council, et cetera, et cetera. There are many, many things, burdens on the commercial marinas that have been placed on us by this change, not just financial, but in a legal sense also. And I think that it should be addressed. I'm sorry I didn't have when Mayor Selich said there's been no interest, no one wants to speak, let's move on. I was sort of dumbstruck and I didn't get up in time. But we do need to address the commercial area of things. There are inequities, there are problems in the commercial area, and the council should address those. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'm Brian Ozonian, and holder of a dock and a pier, and a mooring. I want to congratulate the new council members. It's a pleasure to stand before you today. Just 2 points on this issue. Keep in mind, owning a dock is terribly expensive. Maybe the perception is, well, everybody that has a dock can afford it. But it's constant with tide and weather conditions. And if you were standing on a dock during these winds, I think you'd really get a good idea of what it's like to bear the cost of maintenance and make sure everything is seaworthy as well as usable. So total cost is what, just like the man spoke on the moorings, it's a constant cost that we bear. It's for our pleasure. We extend it to visitors and everyone else, but it is a heavy cost burden. So the other point I want to make is that there seems to be a threat, kind of like a kraken going to come out of the sea and gobble us up if we make the wrong move here. I don't remember that we were under siege when we were talking about the dock tax a long time ago. I don't remember that the state was making threats. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and the assemblyman that's trying to backfill, maybe I was left out of that loop. But it seems odd that we are running in fear, so to speak. If there was a clear and present danger, maybe we can know about it, but it sounds like they're just going to come in and swoop in and take it away from us, and we're done. I don't know that that's true in fact or not, but it sure seems frightening the way it's been presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Mr. Kiff, have you been contacted by the State Lands Commission yet?
Yes, they watched the last council meeting too, and their staff did. The commissioners, I don't know the commissioners do, the commission staff watched the last council meeting and said they'd be very interested in what today's council meeting went.
So you've already been alerted?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public up here?
Madam Mayor, then, if it's okay, I'm going to clarify what I took to...
Mr.
go
Curry,
ahead, sorry.
Just a quick comment. To Joy's comment, and I think she made a good observation, because we did, at the same time that we were going through and looking at these fees, invest more than $6 million from the general fund, from people who are not boat owners, into dredging the harbor and into maintaining the harbor and in benefiting people who do enjoy it. We have about 9,000 vessels in the harbor. We have 86,000 total people, so not everybody's a boat owner. But it's a great economic asset for the city, and it's important for all of us to share in its maintenance and its provision. And to the questions about when you talk about commercial docks, really talk about people who rent their docks. That was not legal before we took this action. And by doing so, we gave people an 18-to-1 value proposition. In other words, you can make $18,000 in rental income for every $1,000 you're paying in additional fees. which was a pretty good increase in value to people, many of whom were renting their docks illegally, and I think that's probably still a problem. But nonetheless, it did give value to people back in the community, and there's people who object to that because they want people parking in their neighborhoods and going down on the dock. But nonetheless, we recognized that there was value to give to people through we do this. So we did try and balance the scales very carefully as we went through and looked at all of the various economic aspects of what we were doing, and trying to be equitable to all of the taxpayers in the city in the investments that we were making, and making sure that the monies that were raised in the harbor were specifically designated to go back into investments in the harbor. And as we get to our capital program later in the year, we'll have significant things on the agenda to reinvest back in the harbor to make sure those funds remain in the harbor and remain benefiting everybody who lives on the harbor, works on the harbor, and has a boat on the harbor.
Can I just follow up on that? Dave, do we know what the revenues are under the new rates for the dock taxes?
We do. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's in your budget document, and we can pull that up at least for the next, when this comes back.
Could you just take a wild guess? Are we talking 10 million, 5 million?
No, right now, because we're in the phase-in period, I think I'm going to say it's about $1.5 million or $1.6 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Council members, any other comment? All right. So we will do
Madam Mayor, if it's okay, the clarification for staff, I'm going to restate what I heard what I saw 4 heads nodding about, because it does take 4 votes, not a simple majority of who's here. The charter says it takes 4 votes to change the ordinance. So that would be to go to a 50 cent per square foot, the lower end of the appraisal. Did you have a public comment? I think we just closed it, but
I do. I didn't I was kind of baffled. I have a comment. This is regarding.
Direct that to the mayor,
Okay,
please.
excuse me. I have a comment. This is not regarding these exact piers. Susan Riddle. I live at 510 South Bayfront. Every single one of you were voted in because you were honest, hardworking, fair, and Team Newport added transparency and fiscal responsibility to the mix. Although some of you, it may seem fiscally responsible to throw in the towel and settle with John Vallely, because honestly, the city continues to incur large legal expenses to defend their established municipal code.
Ma'am, well, this isn't the time to speak about the closed session item.
After we finish this doc, and then no, not until public comments and.
There'll be an opportunity for public comments regarding the closed session item. This is dealing with a different issue. So if you'd like to wait a few
Your comment. Hold your comments. You'll come back. Okay. All right. Please. Thank you.
So again, the direction that we're going to come back from today, we're going to come back with an ordinance change, possible ordinance change. It went to 50 cents as the top amount instead of 52.5. We'd reaffirm or reinforce the language about an inability to seize the dock. The gangway would still be in the footprint, because I didn't hear 4 for that. The U within the water would be out of the footprint, where you have a U-shaped dock. But we would check in with the State Lands Commission and get their perspective. I certainly wouldn't prostrate myself in front of them, but I do kind of want to hear what they have to say, and we'll return with that information. Does that sound about right? Clear with staff? Kristen? Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. I no longer am mayor.
So just as the mayor and Mr. Duffield are coming back, we was conferring with the city attorney, and we could probably do a hard stop for you for closed session at about 6:25 if you want to embark upon the next section, given that there are people in the audience who wanted to come for undergrounding. So as long as that's okay with you, we can probably make that work.
Okay. So the next item is study session item number 4, the utility undergrounding district 101 update from Public Works about the underground utility district process. Staff?
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. We thought this would be an item of interest because we have a lot of undergrounding going on. We wanted to bring this to you tonight to talk about the overall undergrounding procedures, policies, where the funding comes from. We call this Undergrounding 101. Because Mark Vukojevic is with us tonight, he's our Deputy Director, City Engineer, and he's past his 6-month mark. I thought it might be great for Mark to give this presentation to you tonight, and I'm here for questions.
Thank you, Dave. We'll move through this pretty quickly. We have some general background and overview on our process and procedures, and then we have some discussion items we'd like to present to you tonight. So the governing laws, policies, and rules, there are many. It's interesting to note that most of the laws that dictate the assessment district process for utility undergrounding are actually over 100 years old. But there's quite a few, and each one of the rules and policies have to thread through these requirements. What is undergrounding? It's removing overhead electric lines, phone, cable TV lines, and poles and placing them underground. Benefits we hear time and time again in terms of aesthetics, reliability, access, no more, in alleys, I'm not going to hit the telephone pole anymore, and property values. An assessment is technically a levy or a charge on private property for improvements, and it typically shows up on their property tax bill. The city's website is full of resources under our Public Works Department, explaining what undergrounding is, the different types of undergrounding, frequently asked questions, who to call if you have further questions, and how to get things started. The history of undergrounding is pretty comprehensive, as you can see in this map here, and this is on our website too, but we have several or dozens and dozens of projects that we've completed over the years, as well as many in queue. Let me talk real quickly about Rule 20A. It's a rule dictated by the California Public Utilities Commission, and it sets aside a specific amount of funding from all of the ratepayers that pay the electric utility. And in that rule, Edison sets aside money that it collects from all the ratepayers, and then allows the city to underground certain arterial streets, unusually heavy or heavy concentration of overhead facilities through designated arterials or major collector roads. So some of the criteria to use this type of funding. The city typically receives $275,000 a year, and it goes up and down. Over the years, the city has actually purchased credits from other cities that have had excess credits or don't use them, and we have about $2 million saved up in our what we can kind of call our Edison bank account for this type of undergrounding. And then Edison also allows you to basically mortgage 5 years ahead. So if we're getting $275 a year, we can go almost $1.3, $1.4 million ahead is what we can mortgage our future rates on. And a typical project is somewhere in that $3 to $5 million range. 28 projects, the city's done many of these. East Coast Highway, West Coast Highway, Jamboree, MacArthur, Newport Boulevard. If you look in the very light blue lines there, those are all the streets that the city's undergrounded using these types of funds on major arterials. A few years ago, the city prioritized the next set of 28 projects, and Balboa Boulevard is the one that's currently in design and is the #1 priority based on city council discussion before. And future projects that are in queue waiting for funding are Hospital Road, Superior Avenue, and San Joaquin Hills Road. And again, I'm just kind of moving through this very quickly. 20B projects, these are the ones that are privately initiated by residents. It could be businesses as well too, which allows the property owners to form what's a real technical term, underground utility assessment districts. And they're funded through special assessments like we talked about too. Edison does discount this undergrounding cost by allocating the cost equivalency of an overhead electric system. So for example, if it costs $1 million, then they discount it by whatever the value is of the overhead system, typically 20%. And there are some eligibility requirements, and typically what we've seen is the cost historically ranges from $10,000 to $25,000 per property. Over 60 projects using this type of 20B assessment districts and have been funded citywide over many, many years. And in queue or in the hopper, we have about, I forgot to count them here, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, about 10 different projects or 10 different neighborhoods that are collecting petitions right now to implement the 20B assessment district process. And you can see they're at various stages in terms of gathering their petitions. And this number here is, there's about $60 million worth of construction here or potential assessments that are in queue. This is a great little animation we'd like to share too with the before and after of what a typical alley could look like. This one's an animation. We do have real life examples, but they never come out as nice. Anyway. Okay, here's the procedure. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the situation here. So a property owner submits a request to the city and says, I would like to underground my utilities in my neighborhood. And so we work with them and Edison, and we prepare a boundary map. And then we also work with Edison and the other utility companies to come up with a rough order cost magnitude. We do the number crunching, and we hand the proponent a petition package, which they then go out and gather signatures on. And then they come back to us once they've collected 60% of the owners have signed saying they're interested in doing this utility undergrounding. Once 60% is verified by staff, then we put it on a city council agenda. We request advancing city funds to design the new system and the budgets, of course, too. And then we hand it over to Edison and say, Edison, go design this system. And after Edison is complete with their design, AT&T, the cable companies, anyone else that has any telecom on the system designs their system. And it's done so Edison is the base and the other utilities kind of joint either on top or below them. The project is then bid by Edison with hard bid results. And then the city has actual construction cost information to begin the district formation. So with those actual real-life costs, we go out and we finalize the engineer's report, and it identifies an actual cost per parcel. There's an official balloting and voting process that's handled by our city clerk, and it comes to city council here for a public hearing process too. After that's established, the property owners have a 30-day prepayment window where they could pay up front instead of having their property assessed, and that provides them a discount as well too. Bonds are issued, and then Edison and the utilities go out and construct their conduits and wires and remove all of the overhead infrastructure. And then the residents have to hook up to the underground system. The process is complete, and any of the savings that might be in the account are refunded to each of the property owners. Construction is, it entails, trenching and installation of vaults, undergrounding all of these lines and removal of wires and poles, and then any of the repaving, especially in alleys. The construction is, simply put, it's very disruptive, it's very challenging, and it takes a great amount of detailed coordination to make it successful. As I stated, so each property owner then has to hook up from the main line that's in the alley that comes right to their property line and hook up to their meter on the side of their house. And that's a separate cost on each of the property owners, and it's a responsibility based on the municipal code for them to do that. Costs that we've seen, and we've talked to folks, somewhere between $2,500 and $5,000. It depends how long of a run they have to put in this additional conduit in. If you've recently redeveloped your property, over the last dozen plus years, you've likely already provided that underground conduit, and there is no additional hookup cost, excuse me. So in terms of policy guidance, we have about 7 categories, and of course there could be more, but these are kind of 7 ideas that we've come up with that could help with some of the process and procedures. And let me get right into it. So on city facilitation of district formation too, we maintain a website, we have staff resources, we answer questions. We've been doing more and more community meetings. We've started to engage in sending out postcards and different mailings and outreach, and we want to double check with you and see if you'd like us to continue that. And then also, another item that could be on the table is maybe the city council would like an official policy, supporting utility undergrounding assessment districts too. The biggest thing that we hear from the community is in the petition process. Currently it's 60%. It's very commonplace. It's based on laws, codes, and common practice. It preserves a certain balance of property owner rights. It reduces the risk for the voting district to fail, or for the city's advancing of funds to design the project too. It's a good indication if the properties will approve the ballot assessment, and it maintains it as a resident-driven process to assess properties. And like I said, it's very difficult. So one of the options out there is maybe reducing it from 60% to 50%. based on, our review of other jurisdictions, based on review of the codes, this is something that's within reach to reduce that, and we can receive policy direction on that and come back with the process and the code amendments that would be necessary to do that. The next category is trying to reduce the overall cost for Edison and the telecoms and any city costs. So one of the things we always look for is, what are the economies of scale in design and construction and financing? So we always continue to do that, and when we have a district that's in play, we'll walk through, well, if we add this street or add this pole, that could actually reduce costs, and we try to purposefully be very purposeful about that too. And we're suggesting to continue to do that with Edison and any of the telecoms to reduce costs where possible. And a concept that's been thrown out there too is the concept of above ground pad transformers versus underground transformer vaults. It's a high ticket item. I don't have a percentage to give you in terms of total project costs, but they are substantially expensive, and I'll explain why in the next slide. And then we've also heard feedback in terms of, well, city, can you do, is there a different, construction delivery method to help the situation too? And there are a few cities that do the actual trenching and conduit work construction, and that may save some money. At this point, we don't have enough information to tell you that, how much it would save, if any. It does require additional resources in terms of, consultants and contract help to manage that. Because like I said, if you look at those pictures of the alleys, they take a lot of time and effort. And then there's the district formation costs too. We prepare these rough order of magnitudes. There's a line item for every single cost figure there too. And the city has discretion in terms of what it wants to do for those costs. But there is an equity balance there in terms of all of the districts that have been done into place versus any future subsidies that the city may choose to do. Just a good picture of just kind of what, putting an above ground transformer pad could sound good in theory, but it's nothing like having a refrigerator in the parkway that's painted green, and that's what they look like, and that's what they are. You can find some places where you can put them, but they're tough to place. Sometimes in medians you can, but they're tough to place. Versus but they're less expensive. Going the underground way is absolutely better aesthetically, but it costs more. And you can see like just the dewatering system for the picture on the right too, to put in one vault is pretty comprehensive. So we're also bringing to you in terms of policy guidance what else can we do to accelerate the time period? So if we as staff continue to stay active in city facilitation, would be a good idea. We would also like to engage, Edison and telecoms to kind of bring them to the table. What else can we do to speed up these processes, once we have a live district that's in place too? And maybe there's some methods that we can do to continue the momentum with petition gathering and voting, because it's a crucial link too. So maybe there's even some overlap as we're approaching the final design. We can kind of commission some of the engineering work or engineering reports. Another big policy item is regarding city-owned land and city-owned parcels. So in many of the districts or many of the undergrounding areas, there are parks, fire stations, and other city-owned land. And City Council has a policy, L28, which really speaks to the balloting procedure. And it speaks to that the assessment should be done in terms of the city decision on a case-by-case basis. But perhaps for the purposes of the petition gathering process, the city could do some sort of generic policy where it amends the policy where it says, hey, the city's interested in undergrounding its parks, its city-owned land, and for the purposes of the petition, you can count the city for the petition process. So in other words, maybe you authorize the finance director or the city manager to sign the petition for any city-owned land. The city's had a big track record of purchasing other agency 20A credits. Again, these are projects on major arterials, and we've bought them for 50 cents on the dollar. We've thought those have been good value, and they help with citywide beautification. So a direction to us could be go out and see if other cities still have any of this excess money that we can go buy at a discounted cost. And finally, are all about leverage here too. So this is maybe more of a summary slide that kind of talks about, where we want to continue to coordinate with any of our city projects. We want to continue to look for any adjacent cost benefits, and we want to look for any further city facilitation. Council Policy L28 kind of really speaks to, I think, an important, couple of words here, and which is really the sensitivity and why the rules and the policies and procedures are so purposeful. It talks to the fact of how, the city recognizes and has sensitivity to the fact that these assessments are costs to the taxpayer. And so that's why there's all of these purposeful steps in there. And we got through that pretty quickly, so we're here to answer any questions, and we can back up on any of these slides as well as take any public input, but we are looking for some direction from you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I don't see any questions from council at this time, so
I have a question.
you're supposed to cue in?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I apologize. Well, it's more of a statement. I just want to thank staff and Dave, and Mark and staff. We've talked a lot about this. I've heard from residents for many, many weeks now all over the city where some current and former plans have gone, and I really appreciate what staff has done to look at some process improvements, and we'll get into that this evening, but I just want to commend you because I think you have touched on every pain point that residents have, and I hope we can come up with a good solution tonight, so thank you.
Councilman Piotr.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Mark, thanks very much for bringing this forward. I would really like to see the policy change towards things like, I consider this a self-help deal where we've got residents that are willing to go out and tax themselves to beautify their neighborhoods, and the city's a beneficiary of it. Overhead utilities block automated trash equipment. They make it difficult for emergency equipment, trash trucks to get down alleyways, and the whole pride of ownership thing. So anything we can do to encourage these guys to develop these districts and to go ahead and pursue the undergrounding, I'm very much in favor for, including having an automatic yes vote. Now, on the other hand, I don't want to see them, do a flagpole annexation and just include a piece of property to get us over the hump. But a 10% minimum or something along those lines for city properties might be justified. But yes, anything we can do to offer, encourage, help organize, I'm in favor of. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, public comments. Anyone wanting to speak, please step forward.
Hi, I'm Joy Brenner, and I own 2 duplexes in Old Corona Del Mar, and I'm willing to do anything possible to get our utilities undergrounded. And as you know, that's going to cost me a chunk of money, but as we all know, it's an eyesore. It's just a total eyesore. It's not just an eyesore for those of us who live there, but the people in Harbor View that look down upon us, and people that come to our city and see that, I think just don't even believe that we in Newport Beach still have that kind of a condition in our city. But one of my main concerns has always been safety. That wasn't one of the benefits, I don't think, but I remember many years ago when we had the Laguna Beach fire, and the fire was up at the top of the hill, and we were at Newport Coast, and we were packing up all our belongings and thinking that we were going to have to evacuate. And also every time the winds blow really hard, I start to think, what's going to happen if one of these power lines goes down and sparks something, because we're so close together and we have conditions there that, all of Old Corona Del Mar could go up if the conditions were right. So safety is an issue for me, but also just the, just how it looks. And I would like to volunteer to work in any way possible with the city on developing community input in this way. Not only am I a resident for 53 years of Corona Del Mar, but I've been an investor for the last 50 years since I was a 16-year-old sophomore at Newport Harbor High School. When they built Corona Del Mar High School, the mayor asked for a group of students. We worked with him. When I was at Corona Del Mar High School, I was a student leader. When I was, after I had my children and had them at Harbor View and at Corona Del Mar High School, I was on PTAs and PFOs. I've worked for the chamber. I've worked on all their events. I've been an investor in this city for many years, and I think that What we need is to get people re-involved with what we're doing in this community and not have things just fostered upon us. We need to get, and you know what, we can't come to every city council meeting. We can't be at every committee meeting that you have, so we've got to find a better way of getting our citizens involved on a regular, and Dave's newsletter that he's sending out is really helpful because it helps us to know, what's coming up that we need to know about. But we need to get some more, and I know I was on the PB&R commission for many years, and so I know we have city commissions that do wonderful work. But for some reason, we're not getting the amount of community input into things that we need to be getting. And I don't fault city council or city staff, because I know you try in every way possible, but somehow we have to find a new way, maybe with technology or whatever, to get our citizens to really buy into the process and be part of the stakeholders and not sit back and complain when they don't like how things turn out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dennis Baker, and she's kind of introduced the things I was interested in. First of all, about 20 feet from where I sit at my dining room table and eat is a transformer. So if the transformer blows up, you won't see me anymore. And so obviously I have a personal interest, and as a property owner, the value of my property is certainly associated with the undergrounding. Having said that, also, I represent the west part of the Flower Streets in Corona Del Mar and the Residents Association. So to one of her points about getting people involved, we in the association are very interested in this. It certainly isn't unique to Corona Del Mar. There's other areas for undergrounding, but Corona Del Mar is an area that really needs to consider a lot of this. One of the things, and I don't know how you would do this, but one of the things I think that's important is the city keeps the dialogue and keeps us informed. By that, I mean, we have staff participation at our meetings, council participation, but if the staff somehow interacted, so I saw the list of the things that are ongoing, so that type of information is really important, because my understanding is there's a process going right now, petition process, very close to where I live, a block away. So maybe that would be a good time, if I knew about that, to maybe broaden it and get that scale. Because right now, and maybe staff could clarify, right now my understanding is these can be very, very small things, like a block, like a square block, or they could be 30 square blocks. And I think I see Aaron's nodding. So the idea is maybe some of this consolidation and a little bit more coordination through, I'm not asking the city to do the citizens' work on petitions, but I think there's still not a good conveying of information on what's going on to the community, to where the community members may see an opportunity. And then the final thing is, I'm not sure one process fits all. The area where I live in, which is the West Flower Streets, is heavily rental, so you're dealing with a lot of absentee landlords, whereas on the other side of town, they're all R1s or individual homes, so the process there might be a little easier to get off by the property owners, where if it's absentee landlords, there might be a little bit of more of a challenge to that. I have no idea whether you can adjust for that, but that is an issue that's going to differ between neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Council, staff, thank you for giving me a few minutes to discuss some of the points that I think are important. I'm the existing president of the Balboa Island Improvement Association, obviously from Balboa Island, and representing that district. Unfortunately, I have the dubious interest in being the only district that has already been to vote and lost, and we're back up to the plate again. And I think it's important for me to say this because most of the council members were not on the council at the time. Back in 2009, when we went to vote, the council and the city decided to abstain from the vote. As a result of that, we lost, and we lost by 2 votes. And had the city actually voted, we would have won, it would have carried, and it's my understanding the city has lost something close to $750,000 in engineering costs as a result of that. So I would urge the city, your comments, I really appreciate, to vote positively in all the districts that are up. The second thing I want to address is the petition process. We live in an area that's a little bit different than most areas in that we have a lot of non-owner occupied properties. On Balboa Island, but it's probably about 20%. If you get on the peninsula, it might be as high as 35%. And it becomes very, very difficult for us to collect petitions from those individuals. Yes, there's lists from the realtors and the county, but the information on that list doesn't make it very easy except to mail to that individual. Most of the time, particularly in the upscale area that we live in, people do not put their phone numbers on their property tax bills, so you really can't get a hold of them. There's also a lot of LLCs and trusts, so you really don't know the individual that you really need to talk to. So I would urge the council to do one of two things: either reduce the requirement or eliminate the requirement for a petition. Mike Sinacore, the assistant city engineer, and I have had a couple conversations about the possibility of doing this, and I guess there is a possibility. However, there is a legal issue, and apparently if we do not do the petition, then it could be a requirement that the city pay part of the cost of the underground utilities. So it's my understanding that we would have to do some kind of motion or change in the municipal code. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Oh my. I'm Brian Ozonian, and I stand in opposition to the previous speaker. I stand in opposition to, let me just say what I'm for. Undergrounding the whole city except for Balboa Island. Balboa Island is unique. I have a degree in engineering. I can speak to this because it's underwater. It's insane to put underground electrical submerged underwater. Now, technically, as I reviewed the data, the connections of the vaults to the conduit have a 20-year life. City has no study of submersed utilities past 20 years. So someone's worried about explosions. I wonder what happens when the seemingly sewer system of conduits get flooded. It goes all through the island. And if you want to go back, and I know Mayor Seelig was around, and I think Councilmember Curry, probably bigger than the dock tax was the unrest over the Balboa Island underground. If there was an election taken after that, it would have been disastrous for council. The way it was handled, the way it was perceived, was atrocious. The numbers were hidden. We couldn't get information. The costs to the property owner were hidden. They were not talked about. And it's still briefly mentioned, but you have people on fixed incomes that have a cost, let's say it's $5,000 to do their private property. That doesn't go on the lien. There's no funding for that. There's no assistance for that. People had to sell their homes on a little island when that was imposed there. So there's more to it than just what staff is presenting. Also on the island, we have 2.5-foot side yards. In that 2.5 feet, to put underground in, you have to change the panel, by the way. We don't just hook up to the overhead panel. You have to change the panel to an underground service. And you have to bury it 3 feet down while you're entering the property. Well, what's in those side yards? Plumbing for gas, water, sewer. Everything has to be changed when you disrupt that. You have to remove it because the power goes underneath it for 3 feet of burial. So there's a tremendous property coordination, property cost. And by the way, this petition should be 80%. It shouldn't be 50%. I'm completely the other way with this. The people that did not know were running in with their votes, and they were late, and it would have been maybe 10 votes more. But the whole process is a bad memory on the city. I hope it can be better, but it shouldn't be on Balboa Island. Someone can show me how this thing will live past 20 years. Maybe I could be convinced. But I'm looking, this thing's supposed to, how do you perceive this to last? 50 years? I don't think it's going to happen. No one can guarantee it. And I just have nothing but bad things to say about trying for the city going after submerging power under Balboa Island. Everywhere else, great. That's great. I understand about the safety. I understand about the passion for keeping properties better. All makes good sense. But I'll send you a letter on the rest of my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Michael Smith, lifetime resident of Balboa Island, 327 Onyx, and I totally agree with the previous speaker. I was very much involved in the process in 2009 against the underground, and it lost by an extremely close vote. My objection to it has nothing to do with the looks or cost. It is the cost issue. I'm a fixed income person on Balboa Island. At the time, my cost would have been close to $30,000 for my interior lot. I said, oh, don't worry, we'll make a bond. My bond payment would have been about $185 a month for 20 years or whatever it was. If you don't make the payment, the lien goes on your house. It was a pure and simple dollars and cents argument for me. I don't think the residents should pay for it. I understand if it does pass, you have to pay for your connection, which is substantial in my case, but it's just a cost issue. The residents should not have to pay for that type of underground utility.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Patty Gorsuch, a proponent for Assessment District 117 in Corona Del Mar. Mayor Selich, members of the City Council, staff, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this study session today. We very much appreciate it. Like many in the room, I strongly support the need to eliminate the petition or reduce the signature threshold to 50%. But what I would like to talk to you about right now is costs. Assessments pertaining to undergrounding utilities in recent years have increased by twofold or more. And there have been some contributors to that increase, and I would like the city to examine each of those cost components to see what can be done to bring down costs. One area that might be examined is the city overhead charge that is put into the costs, and that in our particular assessment district shows to be $100,000. Another one is the assessment engineering costs. It appears potentially high to the market, and I would recommend that the city consider doing requests for qualifications to assessment engineers and create a panel of qualified assessment engineers. And then as every district comes up, there's an opportunity to bid, and that bid will result in truly a market pricing for assessment engineering. Right now, what we have is somewhat of a sole source arrangement. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the use of municipal bonds. In our cost itemization, it shows various costs associated with muni bonds for consultants and fees and so forth in that $600,000 to $700,000 range. And I would like for the city to explore the use of bank financing as an alternative to bonds. Bank financing will have the unique opportunity to finance the connection charge, whereas municipal bonds cannot do that because those improvements are deemed to be private improvements. And so I do have Jeff Spinelli in the audience here with Farmers and Merchants Bank. We've had some conversations with them and like to see that there might be an opportunity to sit down with Farmers and Merchants, or for that matter, other banks, to be able to do a side-by-side comparison of costs and advantages of bank financing versus municipal bonds. Finally, I'd like to mention that one thing that you've been hearing about tonight is the burden of these assessments on notably seniors with fixed income. And I would like to ask that the city consider reestablishing an assessment deferral program. I believe that there's a way that the city could create a fund and charge an interest rate maybe equivalent to the state local investment fund, the LAIF rate, and that lien be placed on property not due and payable until death or sale of property, something like that. So if we could maybe look to see if that would be possible, I think that would help. And thank you so very much. And I just want to say I was very impressed with the staff report and so appreciative of all the address of issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Good evening, Council. Josh Yoakum, Balboa Island. I'm here to recommend strongly against changing any of the the petition protocols involved with the assessment. In my opinion, the burden of engagement of our community should rest solely on the shoulders of the proponents of the assessment, and anything below 60% to me is just silly. In 2009, on Balboa Island, when the assessment was denied, they successfully retrieved 60% of the petitions of our neighborhoods, and I don't see why we should make any changes if prior circumstance showed that they were able to do so. And to address Councilman Piotr's thought of letting residents tax themselves, I agree. Yeah, let someone tax themselves. The problem with this is an assessment of a capital improvement project, and if they want to tie themselves that anchor, go for it. Problem is that chain's tied to my waist and the waist of everyone else in the assessment district. And to me, the burden should remain. They should be actively engaging residents if they want this assessment to take place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Selich and members of the City Council, my name is Jeff Spinelli. I'm with Farmers Merchants Bank, and I've been approached by members that are in favor of the underground utilities, and our bank has reviewed some of those proposals and is prepared to look at creative ways to help finance some of these for commercial and residential property owners. We do understand that there are 9 districts that are under the petition signature stage, and we are excited about the possibility to help out some of our neighbors and community players. Thank you.
Thank you. How many more people want to speak?
No, we're out of time, so I'll be really short. My name's Lee Pearl with Balboa Island, and I just wanted to assure the council that there's a very well qualified, hardworking committee on the island taking step by step, very slowly and deliberately going through the process. We understand all of the issues, and before we move anything forward, we'll be working with staff. We've met with Edison, and we recognize our island issues, many of which were brought up this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Kiff, we really don't have time to discuss this evening, so I suggest that we put this on the next study session agenda where we can have some thoughtful discussion. You've got 8 pages of policy guidance and
Yes, sir.
not enough time to get into it.
Okay.
Okay, Madam Clerk.
The city provides a yellow sign-in card to assist in the preparation of the minutes. The completion of the card is not required in order to address the city council. If the optional sign-in card has been completed, it should be placed in the box provided at the podium. The City Council of Newport Beach welcomes and encourages community participation. Public comments are invited on items listed on the agenda and non-agenda items. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes per person to allow everyone to speak. Written comments are encouraged as well. The City Council has discretion to extend or shorten the time limit on agenda or non-agenda items.
Okay, public comments. Ms. Riddle.
Okay, thank you. Sorry I didn't understand where I should have been. Mayor Selich and council members, my name is Susan Riddle. I live at 510 South Bayfront. Every one of you were voted in because you were honest, hardworking, fair, and Team Newport added transparency.
Could we have quiet in the back there, please?
And fiscal responsibility to the mix. Although to some of you it may seem fiscally responsible to throw in the towel and settle with John Vallely, because honestly, the city continues to incur large legal expenses to defend their established municipal code in light of John's suit against our city. I'm just one residential mom that doesn't have a big microphone in this community. I am obviously very intimidated standing up for what is clearly legally a strong position against a well-known, well-spoken, influential member of our community. Please note, however, that on my side are the carefully researched and thoughtful legal decisions by 2 judges. I assume a 3rd judge is looking at the same set of facts from the claims of John Vallely's ongoing lawsuits. And there are, for all of you, the list of what Judge Gastelum last said. Superior Court Judge Gastelum ruled that the case John used was not, the case law that John used was not pertinent to his case. Judge Gastelum also clearly stated that John had no vested right to maintain the commercial pier as it presently exists, and that the pier is not a legal, non-conforming use to which he has a legal right to continue. That's according to the second judge. Both judges have ruled the same. Please do not let your pledge to wisely spend our city's funds override your obligation to continue the good fight for what is legal according to the Newport Beach Municipal Code. I'm asking for no special favors, only to be treated as you would wish to be treated in similar circumstances. Please step up to the plate and continue to fight what's right according to the law. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Mayor Selich and members of the council, my name is Jim Mosier. I know that you're running quite late. I did have two things I want to speak to you about very briefly. First, about the special council goal setting session that is on the calendar for this Saturday in the community room. I wanted to suggest to you once again that it's really better to meet in this room. I think that the new council members will discover that the acoustics in the community room are poor, the presentations are awkward, and a large segment of the public has no opportunity to participate in the meeting or to follow what is happening because, at least in past years, there's been no live or even recorded video for them to review of that meeting. You have the technology here. It would be a lot better to meet in this room. The second item I wanted to talk to you about is the confusion at the last meeting about the vote on the fire ring issue. Did you vote to send a specific permanent plan to the Coastal Commission, or did you not? As I reminded you in writing, and I hope you read that, there is a existing council policy, A10, setting procedural rules for how council meetings are supposed to be handled. It calls for the chair to state the motion before the debate begins, and at the end, for either the chair or a staff person to restate what you're voting on before you take the vote. I don't think that would be burdensome to have the clerk do that before the vote, and I think we could have avoided the confusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll now adjourn to closed session. Mr. City Attorney, you have any announcements on the closed session items?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Selich. The City Council will adjourn to closed session to discuss labor negotiations between the city and all represented employees with the city's labor negotiator, City Manager Dave Kiff, as well as to meet with legal counsel regarding the litigation entitled John Valle versus City of Newport Beach. Thank you.